All right, welcome everyone to the Citizens Guide. Thank you for joining us. On today's episode, we are going to discuss Congress's first override of the president's veto power, new announcements for President-elect Biden's cabinet, the Georgia Senate runoffs, the swearing in of the 117th Congress, continued attempts to overturn the election, and the ongoing vaccine rollout in the United States and abroad. Also, Connor, before we start, exciting announcement to make. Would you like to take it away?
Should I say good morning or good afternoon to both listeners and viewers? Because as of today, we will be posting our recording videos on YouTube. So if you miss our faces, if you miss just looking at us, um, subscribe to our YouTube channel at the
Yeah,
Citizens Guide,
yeah,
and then you'll get to
absolutely.
see us.
Absolutely. All right, good deal. Up, Connor, we need to talk about the Senate and the House overriding Donald Trump's veto of the NDAA, I believe.
So Congress delivered President Trump his first veto override in the waning days of his presidency over the National Defense Authorization Act with a vote of 322 versus 87 in the House and 81-13 in the Senate. Um, this is an annual piece of legislation about concerning funding of the military. Some new changes to the legislation include a 3% increase in pay for service members and a boost in hazardous duty incentive pay, new benefits for tens of thousands of Vietnam-era veterans who are exposed to Agent Orange, and a landmark provision aimed at preventing the use of shell companies to evade anti-money laundering rules. The president vetoed the legislation, citing a shifting list of reasons, including his objection to a provision directing the military to strip the names of Confederate leaders from bases. He also demanded that the bill include the repeal of what is known as Section 230, a legal shield for social media companies that he has tangled with. Republicans and Democrats alike have said that the repeal, a significant legislative change, is irrelevant to a bill that dictates military policy.
Yeah, you know, Connor, it's really beautiful to see this spirit of bipartisanship blossom in order to fund the most bloated department in our government. Yes,
Mm.
imperialism itself is a bipartisan notion, I'm afraid. Um, you know, jokingly, but not really. We really do need to look at how we spend our money, especially when it comes to defense. I think it's interesting that of all the terrible things this president has done, this is the first time that we override a veto, um, not for some higher purpose. It was just to make sure that the Pentagon stays funded. And there are good things in the bill, like renaming bases is good. You know, benefits for Vietnam vets is good. Like there are good things, but there's a very deep problem with how we fund our defense organizations.
And the last time, just a fast fact for everyone, the last time Congress overrode a veto was in 2016 when President Obama vetoed legislation allowing victims of 9/11 to sue the Saudi Arabian government. Um,
Right, which is
so
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
that's weird, but yeah, I guess
Mhm.
maintaining good relations with the Saudis is also bipartisan.
And another thing we need to re-examine.
Yes, yeah, just to add that to the long laundry list of things. Um, okay, so up next we have two Biden announcements that are not new, but just kind of flew under the radar with like Christmas and this and the relief bill and everything kind of happening. So first up, we have Susan Rice as the head of the Domestic Policy Council. And we've talked about Susan Rice on the show before, but just to remind listeners and viewers, she is the former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs under President Clinton, the former ambassador to the United Nations under President Obama, National Security Advisor under President Obama as well. And she was considered a top contender for Joe Biden's vice presidential pick. So this is going to be a new arena for her. The Domestic Policy Council is kind of a more low-key part of our government. It's chaired by the president, attended by several cabinet secretaries, and it's the principal forum for considering domestic policy matters, excluding economic policy, which is arguably the largest bit of domestic policy, but economics is under the purview of the National Economic Council. So yeah, when he announced it, he said Susan will elevate and turbocharge a revitalized council, so kind of prioritizing the DPC, whereas in years past it's kind of taken a back seat. Her experience in the federal government, working within the bureaucracies, and close personal relationship with Biden, I think will be key assets for pursuing her goals. What do you think about this, Connor?
No, I think both you and I were excited to see what sort of role Susan Rice played in this administration, and I do think she brings a sense of policy know-how and sort of political acumen that hasn't really been seen on the council in the past 4 years. We didn't even know it existed. I don't like what is there
Right,
they put out
right.
in the 4 years. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what she is able to do, especially given her background in international relations and foreign policy. Maybe we see some sort of bridge between his foreign policy goals and domestic goals. I don't know.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's totally true. And I think there are shared traits that make someone successful in both of those arenas, and they don't have
Mhm.
to be viewed as so separated, which is how we often view kind of our domestic and foreign spheres of governance. And I don't think there should be that kind of hard line separation, I guess. Okay, so the second kind of big announcement is Miguel Cardona as the Secretary of Education. He began his career as a fourth grade teacher before becoming a principal and then finally commissioner of education for the state of Connecticut. He was born in Connecticut to Puerto Rican parents. Spanish is his first language, so he learned English as a second language in kindergarten in Connecticut. And so that was kind of a challenge that he's spoken about before. And I think that's an interesting perspective for a Secretary of Education to have. But he holds a master's in bilingual and bicultural education, as well as a doctorate in education from the University of Connecticut. And one interesting thing about this, and we didn't really talk about education when we talked about other cabinet positions because it just wasn't kind of in the mix yet. But this allowed Biden to avoid the rivalry of the two major education unions, the two major teachers unions, the NEA and the AFT. So I thought that was really interesting that he didn't pick someone from that kind of represents either one of those, and it allows him to kind of stay in the good graces of both, which is important for a Democratic president with things he wants to do with education, because support from teachers unions is really vital for that. Do you have any thoughts about Cordona?
No, it sounds like a good choice, an educated choice. Um,
Good. Funny. Educated choice for Secretary of Education. That's excellent.
and well, it's not Betsy DeVos, and so like we've said many times, like the past 4 years have been either actively tearing apart the public education system in our country or actively neglecting it, and
Or ignoring it.
or
Just
ignoring
just
it.
absolutely ignoring it.
So I think this is an important choice, and I think one that will make big waves, hopefully, in picking up the slack of the past 4 years.
There's a lot of work to do. There's
Hmm.
a lot of work to do, and there's so much opportunity for leadership in all departments of government right now. So I hope that all of these cabinet secretaries and other advisors find so much success, because everyone really needs them to be really successful at their jobs.
Yeah, no. Um, Pierce, did you know there's an election happening?
I did. Another election.
Another election in Georgia, of all places. Um, as of today and yesterday, timeline's messy. More than 3 million Georgians have voted early, a record for statewide runoff elections in the Peach State. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, their newspaper, reported that 76,000 people registered to vote between the deadline for November's general election and the deadline for the runoffs. Stacey Abrams, leader of Fair Fight and another organization, I think in Georgia, said they're very certain that most of these are Democrats based on demographics. She all went on to say, we haven't stopped reaching those voters. Millions of contacts have been made, thousands of new registrations have been held. We know that at least 100,000 people who did not vote in the general election are now voting in this election. Um,
That's the statistic that's most interesting to me.
mhm.
And those voters, those 100,000 voters, are disproportionately young, and they're disproportionately people of color, and that's got to have Warnock and Ossoff really optimistic about their chances on Tuesday.
Very happy. And then more nationally, you have Vice President-elect Kamala Harris campaigning in Savannah, Georgia later today, or I guess yesterday, Sunday.
Sunday, January 3rd.
Uh-huh. And then both President Donald Trump and President-elect Joe Biden will be in the state Monday, with Biden in Atlanta and Trump headlining a rally in Dalton, Georgia. Um, in a twist I think everyone saw coming, President Trump took to Twitter Friday to make the unfounded assertion that Georgia's 2 Senate races are illegal and invalid, an argument that could complicate his efforts to convince his supporters to turn out for Republican candidates in the 2 runoff races, which will determine which party controls the Senate.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, and we'll say it again now. But whoever wins on Tuesday controls the Senate, because right now the Senate is 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats, if you consider the 2 Georgia seats vacant, which one of them is not. We're not going to get into that. But yeah, if Democrats win the 2 seats, Kamala Harris gets to be the tiebreaker, and we get to enact a lot of really good legislation as long as Joe Manchin's on board. So he's got to be excited for Tuesday, because that'll get him in the headlines, and I think that's
Our broker Manchin.
Exactly. So maybe not Medicare for all, but probably some $2,000 checks getting sent out in early February would be very possible.
I found it interesting in that interview with Stacey Abrams that she mentioned the interviewer pressed her on why Joe Biden outperformed the 2 candidates in the November election, and she said that it was probably because Joe Biden was more recognized at the time, and they've spent the time between that election and this upcoming election working to inform voters of who Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff were. And I think maybe that will work. I don't know how much that played into the general really of unknowingness. But
I think
based
it's
on
possible.
what I've seen on TikTok, everyone has seen the ads, the campaign ads in Georgia.
Yeah, I think it's possible, because any election that Donald Trump is on the ballot, he just forms this vacuum of attention, and it's so hard for any candidate to get the breath they need. And that's especially true with Ossoff and Warnock, who were running in knowing it would go to a runoff. Basically, it was very unlikely that either one of them would garner 50% plus 1 vote. So they've had the time, and I'm optimistic. I really am excited. Recent polling has shown positive results for Democrats. Polling got Georgia right. Polling got Georgia pretty much right this year. So I'm gonna trust it a little bit, and just really hope that Georgia can bring it home for us, because everything that we want to do over the next 2 years relies on positive outcomes in both of those races.
What do you think the possibilities are of split ticket voters, of a Warnock and Purdue, or Ossoff and Loeffler?
There will be discrepancies, but like Ossoff and Warnock will not get the same raw vote total. Just quirky voters will choose not to. Some will vote for one of them. Some will vote for a Democrat and a Republican. Some voters will stay home. I don't think it's likely that one Republican and one Democrat wins on Tuesday. I think that would be very weird. That would require the margin to be incredibly tight, like tighter than Joe Biden's margin over Donald Trump. It would be like, I think, hundreds of votes required to allow those voters who are only voting for one or voting for one of both, which I just think there's a tiny portion of voters that are doing that. It would require it to be that tight. And when you hear those numbers, like 100,000 people have voted that didn't vote on election day, you don't think, oh, these are Trump supporters that didn't vote for Donald Trump and have now decided to support his endorsed Senate candidates. That doesn't sound logical to me. So to answer your question, I don't think it's likely. Do you think it's likely, or a chance of it?
No, I think, I don't think you'll especially see split ticket I think you'll see voters voting for like one candidate only.
And I think if I had to
That's
guess,
more
like,
likely.
I think based on the November results, Warnock will probably get more votes. One, because Loeffler is just very unlikable, unpopular, and she was never elected in the first place. Perdue was at least like elected in the first place, and so he's had like 6 years to deliver for Georgians. I still don't think he'll win. I think Ossoff will win and become a very young United States senator, which is very exciting. So I'm excited. And if Warnock wins, he will be the first Black senator from the state of Georgia. So,
yeah.
And will increase the number of Black members of the upper chamber significantly, because right now, with Kamala Harris leaving, it's Cory Booker and Tim Scott from South Carolina. And I think those are only Black senators in an entire country, which is a different conversation for a different day. But speaking of Congress, Connor, the new Congress, the 117th Congress, met in DC today to be sworn in. They took an oath to protect and defend the United States Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. Little do they know, some of their fellow members are those domestic enemies. So with that, on the House side, Democrats have a very slim majority. They have 222 of the chamber's 435 seats. So just quick math, that's not a lot of leeway. You need 218 seats to pass legislation. They're expected to reelect Nancy Pelosi for what could be her final term as Speaker of the House of Representatives.
And breaking news, they just did.
Oh, they did. Okay, you got the alert. And that goes along with the deal that was brokered by her in 2018. She told leadership that she would seek the term in 2018 and then another term in 2020, and then she would be done. So she's led House Democrats for 17 years now, poised to lead them for 19 years.
And the only woman to be Speaker of the House.
The only woman to be Speaker of the House. We will do a Nancy Pelosi episode when she chooses to retire, because there's so much to talk about. It begins with voting against the Iraq War and continues with passing the Affordable Care Act, and probably 2 years, hopefully with the Georgia Senate seats, 2 years of progressive legislation under President Biden. There will be no slander of Nancy Pelosi on this podcast today, I'm afraid. So if that's what you're looking for, seek other means of it. But she did say, which I guess this is pointless now that she's been elected. She said, "I am confident that the Speaker's election today will show a united Democratic caucus ready to meet the challenges ahead, and that we are prepared to set our country on a new course." So congratulations, Speaker Pelosi.
Yeah.
But the weirdest news out of today has been that 2 newly elected Republicans clashed with staff on the House floor. There's a mask mandate because we're living in a global pandemic, and masking is one of the best ways to prevent it. So there's 2 members who didn't want to wear the mask. One of them was Marjorie Taylor Greene, the QAnon lady that we've talked about before. I didn't see who the other member is. I assume it's the QAnon lady from Colorado. I don't know her name, but I assume it's her. So that's what would make sense. Just a couple more things. There are 118 women in the House of Representatives now, 89 Democrats, 29 Republicans. So that's the most number of women ever. Republicans multiplied their number of women significantly. There used to be very few, and 29 is still not a lot. Like I said, 2 supporters of QAnon in the House now. It's been labeled a domestic terrorism threat by the FBI. Take from that what you will. And then also on the Senate side, they met, but with much less certainty. The outcome of the Georgia races will again determine who controls that chamber. So Connor, any thoughts about Congress, the 117th Congress?
Shaping up to be an interesting just group of people, to put it broadly, I guess. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a dangerous individual, and as we'll talk about later, the direction she is leaning in is the direction the Republican Party is leaning in ideologically. Um, so that's frightening that she's just choosing to grandstand for this issue, and uh, it's scary. It's scary for the health of our democracy that people like her have been elected into these positions of public trust. So, um, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we still need to do our QAnon episode. We've talked about it. We need to do a special episode because now that they're in Congress, people need to know about it.
I was a bit naive in thinking it would die out, but
It feels like
I
it's
think
here to
not.
stay. I guess it was on Meet the Press this morning or something, but it was one of the
Okay,
panelists.
Chuck Todd.
I know. Hey, Chuck Todd did well this morning. He had Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, who's just a nutcase. And he did well. He held his feet to the fire, and they got in a big fight. And I thought Chuck Todd handled it very well. Anyway, there was a panelist that talked about how QAnon is just the culmination of like every conspiracy theory that's pervaded American politics for the last like 3 decades. And I thought that was a really like good way to like synthesize it. It's people who like think that like 9/11 was an inside job, like fake the moon landing, that like Democrats are evil. Like you just like sandwich all those people together. Then you make them stay home for 10 months and only get their news from
OAN and
or whatever. Newsmax. And of course they're radical.
It festers.
It's a disease. And yeah, so it's dangerous, and there's going to be more talk about it in mainstream media as we move forward. I know the Sunday shows were talking about it today. Okay, so the next thing, Connor, is our outgoing, lame duck, boring Vice President Mike Pence.
Fly stool.
Yeah. He has come out in support of the Republicans who are attempting to overturn the results of our very free and very fair election. So 12 senators and senators-elect have signaled their support for the challenge to Biden's victory. I'm going to read the list of them because I think it's important.
Enlighten us with these dignitaries.
Yeah. So they're led by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and joined by Senators Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, James Lankford of Oklahoma, Steve Daines of Montana, John Kennedy of Louisiana, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, Mike Braun of Indiana, and Senators-elect Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, Roger Marshall of Kansas, Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, and Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. That's Coach Tommy Tuberville, for whoever wrote this article. And then also Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. Connor, the most notable part of that is that the great state of Tennessee, the volunteer state, both of our United States senators have joined in this last-ditch Hail Mary, inevitably leading to failure effort to deny Joe Biden the presidency.
Well, if they think the election was a fraud, I would happily not have Bill Hagerty as my senator.
Right. Maybe his election was a fraud.
It might be. We don't know.
It needs investigation, as they say.
It needs
to be looked into.
I think it's embarrassing for the state of Tennessee. I saw multiple people on Tennessee politics Twitter, if you will, lamenting the sort of fall of our Senate delegation from esteemed statesmen of Bob Corker and Lamar Alexander to Bill Hagerty and Marsha Blackburn. As we've talked about before, not as big as a fall.
It's a step down, but it's not a tumble from Mount Everest to sea level. It's a couple steps down.
Out of the ivory tower, we did not.
Yeah, we dare not put Bob Corker and Lamar Alexander on a pedestal, or at least I will not. Other people are free to.
Not compared to these lunatics that are now part of our delegation. I did find it interesting that all of the senators who have vocally supported this, with the exception of Ted Cruz, have a real danger of being primaried by someone more wackadoodle than them, and will lose. And I think that's an unhealthy way to look at it, especially when it comes to preserving the nature of our elections and how they're conducted. but it has to be part of a political calculus for them to say that this is a win tragedy, because they're all smarter than this. I think Bill Hagerty went to Vanderbilt. Like, he's not an idiot.
Which
He
a good resume does not make you a good politician
No.
by any means. Josh Hawley, I believe, went to Yale Law School. It's not that they don't know
Ted
better.
Cruz went to like Harvard.
They know what the Constitution says. They know what the law is, and they know this isn't going to work, but they do it because they are afraid of Trump voters in their primaries. And some of them, Ron Johnson, namely, will be running in 2022 in a state carried by Joe Biden. Wisconsin is not.
It's close.
It'll be close. It will be really hard to beat Ron Johnson. It will be hard in 2022 to beat him because Wisconsin is a hard state to win in an off year. But it can be done.
Yeah.
And doing things like this, I don't know if they make it easier, harder for him to win, but it's got to be a way to
galvanize
the Democratic Party in that state, which is already doing phenomenal work to build an opposition to him. And he is one of the most dangerous figures in our politics.
And wouldn't Marsha Blackburn be up in 22 also?
She was elected in 2018, I believe. So she's got to wait till 24.
Okay.
Yeah, she's got a little more time. She will be up in a year that Joe Biden is potentially up for re-election, or somebody. There will be a presidential election in 2024. I'm not putting any bets on whose name is going to be on the ballot. But to kind of continue with this story, the vice president's chief of staff issued a statement saying that Mr. Pence, quote, shares the concerns of millions of Americans about voter fraud and irregularities in the last election. It went on to say, quote, that he welcomes the efforts of members of the House and Senate to use the authority they have under the law to raise objections and bring forward evidence before the Congress and the American people on January 6th. The only job of the Congress on January 6th is for Mike Pence to physically open like envelopes sent from the Electoral College and read the vote. And then it'll take a House member and a Senate member to object. And then both houses will have to physically separate, because it'll take place in the House chamber because it's bigger and can hold everybody. So then the senators will have to go back to the Senate chamber. They'll debate for like 2 hours per state objection. So if you got an objection for every state, it's 100 hours of debate. Feels like a waste of time.
It's been a waste of time since November 7th or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And what they're calling for is a 10-day audit of quote contested states. There are no contested states. The secretaries of state in every state have certified these results. There's no avenue to fix this now.
No, and there never was, because the people voted is the most important thing.
Yeah, this kind of thing hasn't been successful since the 19th century. And this is all on top of the top election security official telling us this was like the safest and most secure election in American history.
Yeah.
It just
that's not supposed to make sense to rational people. This is serving a Republican primary voter for each and every one of them and also for the elected officials themselves, who view this more as a power grab than sort of defending our democracy, our Constitution. This is more about just making sure they can push tax cuts for themselves, because I think Ron Johnson's one of the members of the Senate, along with Kelly.
They had 4 years. They had so many years to do so many things, and they couldn't even do like the most basic thing, like repealing the Affordable Care Act. They had 2 years of unified government from 2017 to 2019 and just utterly failed to do anything of substance that won't be immediately overturned if Democrats win back even marginal control of the Senate. It's just buffoonery that they want it. I don't get why they want it so bad. They don't do anything when we do give them power. Like, it's just bad faith. And then my final thing on this before we get to the video, Connor, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, who is the top Democrat on the Rules Committee, which has jurisdiction over federal elections, called the Republican effort a quote publicity stunt that would ultimately fail but said it was dangerous nevertheless, amounting to, quote, an attempt to subvert the will of the voters. She noted in an interview that hundreds of millions of votes had already been counted, recounted, litigated, and state certified across the country. I'll never not love Amy Kay. So good for her. I'm glad she belongs on the rules committee. That sounds like a phenomenal place for her to find herself, I think.
Yeah, real stickler for
exactly. Like she gets rules and she wants to follow them.
She enforces them. Yeah.
So, and now we have a clip of Donald Trump pressuring Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his general counsel Ryan Germany to falsify election results, is probably the best way to describe it. So here we go.
You're letting it happen. So look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state. So tell me, Brad, what are we going to do? We won the election, and it's not fair to take it away from us like this. And it's going to be very costly in many ways. And I think you have to say that you're going to re-examine it, and you can re-examine it, but re-examine it with people that want to find answers, not people that don't want to find answers. For instance, I'm hearing Ryan, and he's probably, I'm sure, a great lawyer and everything, but he's making statements about those ballots that he doesn't know. But he's making them with such, he did make them with surety, but now I think he's less sure, because the answer is they all went to Biden. And that alone wins us the election by a lot. You know, so.
Mr. President, you have people that submit information, and we have our people that submit information, and then it comes before the court, and the court then has to make a determination. We have to stand by our numbers. We believe our numbers are right.
All right.
Wow.
That's something. And I guess to give credit, that's from the Washington Post. They were able to obtain access to recordings of part of that phone call. It lasted for an hour. The recording is only 5 minutes. Unsure if that was all that they recorded or all that's been released at this point. So
breaking news alert. They've released the whole transcript on their
website. It always happens. It always happens while we're on air. Well, next week.
Yeah. But just based off that, it's not bad. Good. It's bad. It's bad. And
some would say bad.
If every candidate who wanted to could find 11,780 votes somewhere lying around, they would. But that's just not the case here, because
Al Gore would have loved to find that many votes in Florida.
Because 11,780 people didn't vote for him.
Yep.
And that's how the cookie crumbles, you know?
That's how the cookie crumbles. And
it's, you know, how many other phone calls did he make? Or
right.
How many conversations did this go with the electors, the state representatives who went to go visit him in the interim between the election and the inauguration?
Yeah.
I bet this is not a new conversation he's had with anyone close.
No, it sounds practiced. It sounds practiced.
There's no way he can pull 11,780 out of the top of his hat. Those are too many numbers to put together for him to remember.
It's phenomenal to me, the tone he is able to take when talking about something that is so blatantly illegal that if the House, you know, if he weren't leaving office in 2 weeks, like the House should impeach him for this. Like this is like as or more clear cut than the original impeachment. Like this is truly rises to the level of violating his oath of office.
A high crime.
Yeah. To try to subvert a proper democratic election. It's just not surprising, but it is terrifying.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman from New York, says, I absolutely think it's an impeachable offense, and if it were up to me, there would be articles on the floor quite quickly.
I mean, I think you wait till after Tuesday. Get Georgia's votes, get those voters already voted, and then what's the political downside? there's no downside to impeaching him twice.
And you need to have you need to go through with these rules, even if it is not removed, which like he probably won't be, but
Right.
you need to show that there's consequences for these actions, and
there has to be teeth behind the rules that we claim to have.
otherwise they don't work if we're too afraid to enforce them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess good for the Secretary of State for not, like, what if a Secretary of State did?
Yeah.
Like, it's not guaranteed that we had, I guess, the right people in these jobs when we did.
Who would have thought that
a fluke, really, that the state of Georgia has a Secretary of State willing to say no to Donald Trump? Because if it were Brian Kemp still, we'd probably be living in a different situation. So,
or in a state where the race was closer, I think,
right,
if it
which
was.
Georgia's results alone wouldn't even change the result of the election.
No,
it would make it closer, but you'd have to overturn multiple states to get where you need to be.
And funny that they're fighting over the results in Georgia, one of the two traditionally red states to flip, when you have Arizona that no one's fighting over.
Right.
But there's something that captured their imagination in Georgia about.
Well, it's actually not surprising, because it's the vilification of Black voters in and around Atlanta and Savannah. That's all. I mean, that's all it is. It's this idea that Stacey Abrams represents a new Georgia, and they are so frightened of that, and they will do anything they can to discredit her and her power, and the power that she has built in Black communities in Georgia, to find electoral independence and create real change in Joe Biden. So, solved the mystery.
Yeah, tune in next week.
Exactly.
See what mystery we unravel.
Yeah. Okay, so Connor, moving on from that circus of events, vaccine,
COVID corner.
It's COVID time. Vaccine rollout has been happening, albeit slowly.
Yeah, maybe it might have been happening. More than 4.2 million people in the United States have gotten the coronavirus vaccine. Federal government said Saturday that it had delivered more than 13 million doses to states and federal agencies, but they acknowledged that the vaccine rollout had a slower than expected start, and they said not have a clear understanding as to why only a small portion of the doses shipped across the nation have made it into arms. Maybe a wild stab here that we're lacking national leadership to organize that logistical problem. I think our president's too busy making threatening phone calls to secretaries of state to worry about vaccinating.
He already has his. He's not worried.
No. Did he actually get it though?
See, as I said that, I wondered. I don't think he got it publicly, but I imagine he got it, but didn't want to get it publicly because so many of his supporters are anti-vax.
Just for some numbers of people who might be interested, I'm looking at it, and actually I don't see Tennessee on the list. Oh, there it is. 1.8% of Tennessee's population have been vaccinated. That's like 250,000 doses distributed and 125,000 doses given. So 50% of the doses have been used. If
it's
we
such
had
a failure of leadership,
starting at the top and working all the way down to the state level.
Because what I'm seeing is everyone pointing fingers. Like the states are saying the federal government should have coordinated this. The federal government saying the states should have coordinated this. We should have decided in March who was going to coordinate the vaccine distribution. There should have been a very clear plan in place. Even if you didn't have the vaccine, plan for the worst case. Say this vaccine has to be kept at really specific temperatures, and this is exactly how we're going to do it. Because if we had that system in place, you would see, maybe 10% of the country's population vaccinated by now, or more. It should have been more.
Yeah.
And people die as a result of these vaccines not getting distributed faster. And teachers are going back to work on Monday without having been vaccinated, even though it's been out for a month. You've got people who have been in frontline jobs, retail, food service, who aren't vaccinated, that are still working. They never stopped working. Meanwhile,
And
rich people are trying to find a way to cut in line to get it.
yeah, and if you want like a comparison of another country, Israel has been leading the charge. It's distributed more than 10% of it's vaccinated 10% of its 9 million citizens in 2 weeks, which is just unbelievable. It vaccinated more than 150,000 people on 3 consecutive days and has now vaccinated over half of the 2 million at-risk people it considers a high protection priority.
They had a plan.
They had a plan, but also I will say that I bet it's significantly easier to vaccinate 2 metro areas in a
Yeah.
relatively small country.
Yeah.
Not to diminish that accomplishment, because goodness, it's not impossible to vaccinate a metro area. Like there's a lot of metro areas in the United States.
Yeah, and it's hard to compare the United States to really any other country in that way, because not only do we have like big urban population, big rural population, but we also have like an anti-vax movement that's very strong, and just like a media environment that, as we've talked about every episode, is just not good at distributing like the necessary information sometimes, and a government that's unwilling to do that.
And discredited the science itself behind these achievements. So
right. So there's just not a real comparison for us, because we have the resources. Like we have the resources to get the job done, and we're just not.
Because it's easier not to for some people. It's easier to just pass it on. Globally, again, you have Britain and India approving the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. This is big news because the AstraZeneca vaccine is looking to be the ideal vaccine to administer to low to middle income countries. The Serum Institute in India has pledged to make 4 billion doses by the end of this year. 400 million doses. It's only managed to make about 1/10 of that this year, but they're having $270 million invested by them, and then 300 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to ramp up production capacity to 100 million doses per month by February. So the Serum Institute of India is working to sort of, as we'll talk about in next, the divide between who gets what vaccine and when they get it and how they get it. But an important first step. I think Britain's the only Western country so far to have 3 approved vaccines, AstraZeneca being the third one. Curious to see when it'll make it to the United States. There were faults in the clinical trials about they used some inconsistent dosages, either 1 dose or 2 doses or a half dose for the second dose, and it led to all these mixed numbers, which could delay its certification in the United States. But it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because there are a lot of vaccines still kind of in the pipeline. We're not stuck with just Pfizer and Moderna. Like there are like, I think like 20 or 25 that are still like in the process of being approved, which is really good. The more you have, the better.
The 2 most likely to be approved next is the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson one, but that'll probably be late February, March, spring-ish.
Yeah. So but yeah, to kind of continue the international scope of vaccine distribution, there's an article in Reuters titled "World Risks Moral Catastrophe if COVID Shots Delayed in Africa," its CDC chief says. So this is just kind of a comment about the health disparity between the global north and the global south, which has been evident for forever, and is just a result of colonization, imperialism.
And by global south and global north, you mean what exactly?
I would say like global south, India, Africa, South America, and then global north, the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Russia, China. I don't know where they fit. They're doing fine with vaccines. I'm not worried about their ability to vaccinate their population. But yes, thank you for asking that. So yeah, basically wealthier nations are gaining access to excess doses of the vaccine, and that's starving poorer countries of any doses of the vaccine. And it's really important that like a rich country like the United States doesn't vaccinate its entire population and then just lose interest. Like we need to simultaneously vaccinate our own people and people from other countries as well, because like the global economy can't recover if the COVID pandemic is still ravaging entire countries. I mean, it's ravaging the United States worse than anywhere right now. But yeah, I mean, it's just important that we consider in our government, this is the job of the government, not individual citizens really, but the government, and I hope the Biden administration pays attention to this.
Is listening.
Yeah, I hope you're listening, Tony Blinken,
Mm-hmm.
upcoming Secretary of State. But just making sure that poorer countries are not left behind in this. It just, because that only exacerbates already existing disparities between rich and poor. So
yeah,
that's really all I have at that.
Hard to get our act together right now when we're having doses expire in the United States.
Right.
To marshal the resources and the logistical capabilities necessary to vaccinate other countries, but it's possible because it's not that hard to do. You just have to have like
leadership,
a government that believes in leadership and like a moral responsibility. And I think we will come January 20th. But it's scary because the pandemic, it's not confined to one border. Like the more people vaccinated outside of the United States, the safer the whole world's going to be. And that's how you get back to like a restarted economy and just it's safer. And
and just there's a moral question to it. Mm-hmm. There's a moral and humane issue with a wealthy country hogging all of the vaccine. That's just
I think you have leaders in New Zealand and Canada pledging to distribute their excess doses for free to those countries.
I know New Zealand has a big focus on helping the small Pacific nations that
Polynesian island
are around it.
But another, the COVAX program from the World Health Organization that's the apparatus to deliver these vaccines. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the United States did not sign on to that program.
Yeah, I don't believe we did
earlier this year. I'm not surprised, but again,
maybe Biden can sign on the day he's inaugurated. Maybe we can get in on that because we just have so many resources and it's our responsibility to use them wisely and to spread the wealth. And that has to include vaccines for this virus.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's time for news too dumb to be true. Gotta love it. So mine, we've already talked about it, but the Republican Party sent 2 QAnon supporters to Congress, and they're sworn in today. They're Congresswomen. And this maybe was already a news too dumb to be true, but it needs to be
girl bosses.
Girl bosses. They're QAnon girl bosses. This YouTube video is gonna get 1 million views just because we're talking about QAnon. YouTube loves that stuff.
The algorithm.
Yeah, but that's my news too dumb to be true, and it's just such an indictment of the Republican Party that it's fallen so far, and it is rotten to its core and requires all-out reform, if not just total destruction. And I hope Joe Biden treats it as such. He ought not pretend as if they're good faith actors in our politics anymore, because they aren't.
Especially after the rise of this Kraken caucus that's going to, in the Senate especially, you'll have them vote against the electoral votes.
Right.
My news is similar. It's senior senator from Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn. She tweeted out today, "We are fighting to uphold the Constitution and the integrity of our elections for the American people." American flag emoji. Thank you, Senator Blackburn. But I would just like to ask why you voted in February to block 3 election security bills in Congress. That's really it.
It's just
it's posturing. It's that easy. It's that easy.
They chose not to vote in favor of those election security measures, and luckily we didn't have any big challenges. But it won't always be like that. Russia is gonna try again, like they did in 2016.
It's all a game. It's all a game for power, and
it's too dumb to be true, but it's true.
Yeah. The modern Republican caucus.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, Connor, give
Oh,
us your recommendation for the week. We fired through all those topics.
yeah. So I have a homework assignment for everyone. It may sound like Pierce,
Everyone's so
but
excited.
it's a book report coming up. It's The Deficit Myth by
Stephanie
Stephanie
Kelton.
Kelton.
Professor Stephanie Kelton.
Professor Stephanie Kelton. Fascinating read on shifting the paradigm of how we and also the government should view the role of deficits and budgets in formulating policy, and looking at how those constraints aren't necessarily the ones holding us back from passing legislation, conservative and progressive. That budgetary constraints are not the real force keeping us back from doing big projects like we've talked about before, big government projects that are crucial, and especially now, given that we'll have to be rebuilding from this pandemic and economic crisis and if looming climate change, looming climate crisis. There's a lot of thought to be given in how the government doesn't necessarily need to consider like deficit spending as a real constraint. You read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a phenomenal book, and I hope we can dive into some of her ideas in future episodes, especially the federal jobs guarantee. I think that's a really interesting idea. Yeah, it's great. It just allows, like you said, Connor, people to reconsider how they view the government's deficit, and just the kind of one sentence summary is that the government, because it issues currency, does not have to treat it like we treat our own finances. Like, I can't spend beyond my means. The government can, because the government, in essence, prints its own money. It's more complicated than that. But for people who aren't going to go out and get the book, that's the gist. And for economics people, it's not necessarily inflationary. It's not necessarily inflationary for the government to continue its deficit spending. It's hard to get it all into the last few moments of a podcast episode, but no, I do want to explore some of her ideas in greater depth, because I think it's wishful thinking for the Biden years, but I do hope, Connor, in our lifetimes that we do have a presidential candidate, perhaps named Elizabeth Warren or something, I don't know, that embraces these ideas.
Yeah, and I think we will. Probably not in this administration, but we might see some glimmers of.
Yeah. But Janet Yellen could take some of the ideas,
Yeah.
She could take some and leave others, and
Yeah.
you don't have to embrace it full-throatedly.
No.
We've already seen movement with House Democrats removing the PAYGO restriction on Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. So basically, that just means that if they want to vote on Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, they don't have to include text on how they're going to pay for it first.
And I guess we'll get into congressional rules and procedures. The congressional Republicans did the same thing for their $1 trillion tax cut earlier when they controlled all three branches and yet failed.
And that's all they did.
That's all they did. So not uncommon to do that for the big pieces of legislation. And then also just addendum recommendation, if you are like Pierce and I and will be tuning in to Georgia Returns on Tuesday, may I suggest watching Steve Kornacki on MSNBC? He's got maps. He's got khakis.
He's got khakis. Rolled up, button up. A nice tie.
Rolled up, button up.
He knows the counties.
And he's going to be breaking it down. He knows the counties. He knows the voter registration. It's a fun watch.
Yeah,
it's a fun watch.
Knows it. No, that's good advice, Connor. That's good advice. All right, everyone. This was cool. I'm excited to put this on YouTube so everyone can see what our faces look like while we do this, Connor. But Happy New Year, everybody. And yeah, have a good week. We'll talk to you, and we'll see you next week.